They provoked you, and you gave them nothing. No anger, no explanation, just silence. And in that moment, the power shifted, because they were used to your reaction, not your restraint. Today, you'll understand why your non-reaction destabilizes someone whose entire system depends on it. If this kind of precision is what you've been missing, subscribe. This channel exists to give you the framework, not just the feeling. Here is the reframe that changes the entire picture. You've been thinking about reaction as a natural human response, something that happens when you're provoked, something that signals you care, something that keeps the communication alive. And while that's true in a functional relationship, it is critically incomplete when applied to a dynamic built on behavioral patterns designed to produce emotional responses from you. Here is the mechanism underneath the surface. Bad behavior in an emotionally immature dynamic is not random. It is a regulatory tool. When someone consistently behaves in ways that provoke a reaction, withdrawal, coldness, dismissiveness, inconsistency, they are not simply acting out. They are, consciously or not, using your emotional response to regulate their own internal state. Your hurt confirms their significance. Your anger confirms their power. Your anxiety confirms that the dynamic is still organized around them. Every reaction you produce, regardless of its emotional content, feeds the same system. It tells them that their behavior has weight, that they have leverage, that the dynamic is still running on their terms. Your reaction, in other words, is the fuel. Remove the fuel and the engine has nothing to run on. This is why the non-reaction produces panic. Not because you've become cold or indifferent, but because the behavioral system that was built on your predictable emotional output has suddenly lost its primary input. And a system that loses its primary input doesn't stabilize. It escalates, searching for the response it was designed to receive. Understanding this reframes everything. Your stillness is not weakness dressed up as composure. It is the interruption of a feedback loop that was sustaining their behavior at your expense. Here's how that interruption moves through phases. The first phase is the provocation baseline. This is the phase that existed before your shift. A pattern was established over time. They behave in a certain way. You respond emotionally. The dynamic resets. The pattern repeats. Externally, it looks like conflict followed by reconciliation. Internally, for them, it is a reliable system of stimulation and regulation. Your reactions, your hurt, your frustration, your attempts to resolve have been providing consistent emotional data that their nervous system uses to feel significant, in control, and connected. The behavior continues not because they are consciously cruel, but because the system has never been interrupted. It works until it doesn't. The second phase is the expectation collision. The moment you stop reacting, the system hits an unexpected wall. They deploy the behavior that reliably produced your response, and nothing comes back. No hurt, no anger, no pursuit of resolution. Externally, you are calm, present, and completely unreadable. Internally, for them, this is a collision between what the system predicted and what actually occurred. The nervous system flags the discrepancy as significant. Something is wrong, not in a relational sense yet, but in a pattern recognition sense. The expected output did not arrive. And a brain built on pattern recognition treats unexpected breaks as high-priority data requiring immediate attention. The third phase is the escalation attempt. Before panic arrives, the avoidant or emotionally immature person will attempt to restore the familiar pattern through escalation. The behavior becomes slightly more pronounced. The provocation is dialed up. They push in the direction that previously produced the strongest reaction, because if the system is malfunctioning, the logical response is to increase the input until the expected output returns. Externally, this looks like them becoming more provocative, more present, or more dramatic. Internally, they are not operating from conscious strategy. They are operating from a nervous system that is trying to re-establish equilibrium through the only method it knows. If you hold your position through this phase, the escalation produces nothing. And a behavior that produces nothing, repeated, begins to collapse. The fourth phase is the internal panic. This is the phase that most people never witness because they re-engage during the escalation attempt. If you maintain the non-reaction through escalation, the system cannot re-establish its baseline. The panic that follows is not dramatic. It is quiet and internal, a disorienting recognition that the dynamic has shifted in a way they do not understand and cannot immediately control. Externally, you may see a sudden change in tone, softening, attempts at genuine communication, unexpected warmth or vulnerability. Internally, what they are experiencing is the loss of predictability, which for someone whose sense of control has been organized around your reactions is genuinely destabilizing. Your stillness has communicated something no argument ever could. You are no longer organized around their behavior. The fifth phase is the renegotiation signal. If the panic is allowed to run its course without being rescued by your re-engagement, it produces the only thing that can lead to genuine change in the dynamic, an authentic attempt at different behavior. Not because they've had a breakthrough, because the old behavior has stopped working. And behavior that stops working gets replaced, either with something more genuine or with an exit. Either outcome gives you more information than the cycle ever did. Either outcome is better than the loop. Here is the contrast that separates people who shift dynamics from people who stay trapped in them. Most people, when provoked, react and then feel guilty for reacting. They apologize for their emotional response, over-explain their position, or work twice as hard to smooth over the tension their reaction created. This cycle, provocation, reaction, guilt, repair, is exactly what the dynamic is built to sustain. Each iteration reinforces the other person's behavioral pattern and trains them that the system is stable, that they can push and the dynamic will absorb it. What actually dismantles the pattern is not a better reaction. It is the decision to stop treating their behavior as something that requires your immediate emotional response. This doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means you've made a decision in advance, from a place of clarity, that your emotional energy is not automatically available to process the consequences of someone else's choices. That decision, practiced consistently, changes the entire structural architecture of the dynamic. Not because you've become unreachable, but because you've become self-possessed. And self-possession, in a dynamic built on your reactivity, is the most disruptive thing you can introduce. 5 principles for executing non-reaction with psychological precision. The first is pre-decision clarity. Non-reaction cannot be improvised in the moment. It has to be decided in advance. Before any interaction, get clear on this. Your emotional response is yours. It is not automatically triggered by their behavior. It is something you choose to deploy or withhold based on whether engagement serves you. That pre-decision changes the architecture of every moment of contact. You are no longer responding to them. You are operating from your own framework. The second is regulated stillness. Non-reaction is not the suppression of emotion. It is the regulation of expression. You are allowed to feel everything you feel. The decision is about what you externalize and when. Practice returning to a physiologically calm state before responding to anything. A slower breath, a moment of genuine pause, a brief internal assessment of whether your response serves the dynamic you want to create. Regulated stillness is a skill. It compounds with practice. The third is behavioral consistency. The non-reaction must be consistent to be structurally effective. Reacting 8 times and not reacting once produces confusion, not change. The pattern that needs to be disrupted is disrupted by sustained behavioral consistency, not by occasional strategic withdrawal. Every time you hold the non-reaction when the provocation arrives, you are reinforcing a new pattern. Every time you break it, you reset the baseline. The fourth is redirected processing. The emotional energy that would have gone into reacting needs somewhere to go. Without redirection, it becomes suppression, which is neither healthy nor sustainable. Process it privately, physically, creatively. Journal it, move through it with your body, talk it through with someone outside the dynamic. The goal is not to eliminate the feeling. It is to ensure the feeling gets processed in a space that serves your own clarity, rather than in a space that serves their behavioral system. The fifth is outcome observation. After the non-reaction, observe what happens without interpretation. Don't construct a narrative about what their response means. Simply watch. Do they escalate? Do they soften? Do they pursue? Do they withdraw? The data their behavior produces in response to your stillness is the most accurate information you've ever received about what the dynamic is actually built on. Let it inform your understanding without pulling you back into reaction. Here is where the tactical becomes identity level. Using non-reaction as a tool to manage a specific person in a specific dynamic is useful. But the deeper work available here is the construction of an identity that isn't organized around other people's behavior in the first place. You don't react. You assess. You don't defend. You observe. You don't explain yourself to someone whose behavior has already explained them. You don't treat every provocation as a problem you're responsible for solving. You don't measure your emotional response by the intensity of their behavior. You measure it by what serves your own clarity and your own standards. This is not coldness. This is self-possession. And self-possession is not a tactic you deploy in difficult dynamics. It is the state you build through consistent practice until it becomes the default from which you operate in every relationship, every conversation, every moment where someone's behavior is designed to produce a specific response from you. The version of you that has built that state is not controllable in the way you once were. And that version is not something anyone who depended on your reactivity can easily take for granted. Here is the perspective that ties all of this together. At the deepest level, your reactivity was never just about them. It was about a pattern of treating other people's emotional states as more urgent than your own, of responding to external behavior before checking in with your own internal standard, of being organized at the nervous system level around what someone else did rather than around who you've decided to be. Non-reaction is the practice of reversing that organization. Every time you hold the stillness, every time you feel the pull to react and choose assessment instead, you are not just changing a dynamic. You are rebuilding the architecture of how you relate to the world. From the outside in to the inside out, that is not a small shift. That is the shift that everything else depends on. So here is the only question worth closing with. What would become available to you in your relationships, your decisions, your sense of self, if your emotional response stopped being something other people could trigger and became something only you could choose? That version of you already exists. The only question is whether you're ready to stop reacting long enough to meet them.